Next, I'd like to welcome another Summit Honorary Co-Chair, representing the Commonwealth of Virginia's Senate District 15, Senator Ghazala Hashmi.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is such an honor to join you all here this afternoon at the Women's Collective. All of you are leaders and advocates and storytellers. These are the voices that are shaping our collective future. So today we're going to reflect not only on the roles that we play in our communities and in government, but more importantly, how our own stories have brought us here and how they cast light on the way forward. And I wanted to begin by sharing the story of one woman in particular, and that's my grandmother. My grandmother, who was born in India in 1918, and she came into a world and into a culture in which girls were not expected to have much of a public presence or role. And when she was just 8 years old, she was pulled out of school because formal education was not expected to be the part of a life for girls and young women. But she continued to pursue learning on her own. She read widely, and she could do calculations in her own head with ease. And I know this for sure, she always made grown men quake in their shoes because of her sharp tongue. Her intelligence, her strength, and her clarity of purpose were simply unmistakable. And although her world denied her an education, she refused to let the same fate happen to her own daughter. She made sure that both of her daughters, one of whom is my mother, that they went on to college, went on to earn graduate degrees, and she lived long enough to see her own granddaughters earn doctoral degrees in medicine, law, and literature. My grandmother led a quiet revolution, one daughter, one degree at a time, and I've always been in debt to her for her courage and her resilience. Her story continues through me, and I know that many of you carry so many similar legacies of mothers and aunties and grandmothers who made those bold choices in quiet ways sometimes. And these are the stories that don't always make headlines, but they are surely the backbone of our communities. And today, AAPI women are leading in every sector, from Congress to corporate boardrooms, but representation is only the beginning. True leadership is not just about who's visible, it's about who gets to shape the systems that we all live in. And that's where storytelling becomes so powerful, because storytelling doesn't just share experience, it makes space. And when we tell the story of someone like my grandmother, we're not just honoring her, we're actually challenging assumptions about leadership, about tenacity, and about presence. And when these stories are heard by government, when they inform our public policy, that's when real transformation happens. Because the role of government isn't just to legislate, it is actually to reflect the people that it serves, to be moved by their lives and to dismantle the barriers that they've had to navigate alone for too long. So your leadership doesn't begin when you're handed a title. It begins the moment you decide to speak your truth and to carry the legacy of those who have come before you. So let's keep telling our stories, not just as a footnote, but as a force for real change, because storytelling is not soft power. It's actually strategy, and it's a history, and it's the blueprint for the future that we are all building collectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for those words. I'd now like to introduce our final plenary of the day, the power of storytelling for advocacy. This panel will be led by Policy Director at Vote Mama, Louisa Duggan, Virginia State Senator Ghazala Hashmi, founder and president of the Women's Public Leadership Network, Larissa Martinez, interim president and CEO of APAICS, Nisha and our moderator, APAICS board member, Pearl Kim.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you to the panelists for joining us. Again, my name is Pearl Kim, and I serve on the board of APAICS. I'm going to share a little bit about my own personal story, since it's very relevant to this panel. In 2018, I actually ended up running for U.S. Congress out in Pennsylvania. And as some of you may remember, 2018 was sort of the height of the Me Too movement. And I happened to be a special victims prosecutor. I lived in a very purple district, so I had both elected Republicans and Democrats that were serving our district, and every single elected official got into a Me Too scandal during that time. And so my congressman had to resign immediately, and that gave way to the opening for me to run for political office. And so when I had met with my campaign team, they kept asking, well, why do you want to run? Like, what's your why? And I'm like, well, because I want to make a difference. And they're like, yeah, blah, 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 blah. Everybody says that. What is your why? And I said, well, if you must know, I was a victim of a campus sexual assault when I was in college. I went through the criminal justice system as a victim. I never got the justice that I was seeking. So I went on to become a special victims prosecutor. And I am absolutely pissed that every single public servant elected official is in a Me Too scandal, and that's why I'm running. And my press guy's like, wow, that's a great story. You gotta tell it. I'm like, no, thank you, right? And I'm like, to whom? And they're like, to the Washington Post tomorrow. And I said, you know, let me think about it. If I'm ready, I'll share my story. I was single at the time, unmarried. And so the biggest consideration for me were my parents. I'm Korean American, and I felt like sharing my story would shame them. And so I called them that night and I asked, is it okay if I share my story? You know, I was personally comfortable sharing it. Little nervous with the Washington Post, but I was more nervous about my parents and how they would react. And to my utter surprise, my parents absolutely supported it. And my dad was like, I want to see my daughter in U.S. Congress. You go out there and you fight and you say whatever you need to say to win. And I was like, wow. And so, thank you. And so the next day, I shared it with the Washington Post. And as a result of that, the media storm just snowballed after that. And so that leads into my first question, which is to the panelists. How do you navigate sharing personal stories in ways that protect your well-being while remaining powerful?
I mean, I would say, with everything we talk about on this panel around storytelling, the importance of telling our own stories, our community stories, especially when it comes to our personal ones, sharing them is important, and it's an important part of our advocacy, but not at the expense of you yourself, right? I think those are decisions that, as you think about and hear from all of us about why it's important, it certainly is, but it's for you as an individual to weigh, is the importance of sharing this greater than the cost of sharing it to your own self? And that can be, you know, physical, emotional, mental, whatever it is. That's for you to decide. And so I always feel like, yes, as we're training folks in advocacy, we're always talking about storytelling and sharing your stories, but don't do it at your own expense, is the way I would say that.
One thing I'm going to add is also get a little creative, because even though that was a super powerful story, it also is super personal, but I guarantee you had many other stories that you also could have pulled from when it comes to your why. And I just say that because it doesn't always have to be the biggest story in your life or the biggest thing. You just need something that connects people to you, and all of us have so many of those moments. I mean, my God, I could just pick one from like a coffee shop the other day. I mean, there's just so many of those times where you have the ability to resonate with others. And so just know that, to your point, that you don't necessarily have to pick the one that feels like it could not be something helpful to you, but instead pick something else.
Actually, Larissa, I want to follow up with that. So what advice do you have for those unsure whether their story will matter or will actually resonate, which is sort of what you were kind of discussing?
Well, one, I mean, we all think that all of our stories are super important, and they are to us personally. I think it's It helps to be able to pull together your kitchen cabinet or whoever the people are around you that you can practice different stories in different spaces, and also being really clear on who your audience is. Your story can shift. We at WPLN do a What's Your Why training, and it's kind of what we always start with, because a lot of people think that their why is super easy. Like you can just say, oh, it's because I care, or because I don't like the other guy, or whatever it may be. But really what resonates with people is when you can reflect your why to really, why are you doing this? And it does require you take some time with yourself and think really carefully about it. And I'm sure the center has seen this too, is that not every elected official has their why down. They don't always know that. So get clear on what that initial is, and then you use the story to kind of build and pull in fillers and resonate with the audience that you're trying to reach. So you can have a few different stories in your pocket. It doesn't have to be like your one story. But if you do have one, just get really clear on what the boundaries are.
And to the panelists, have you ever seen a story change someone's mind or build an unexpected coalition?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. So as the policy director at Vote Mama Lobby, I advocate for solutions to make it easier for all types of caregivers to be able to run for office up and down the ballot across the country, primarily at the state level. And I've seen how shifting my story, into my advocacy work can make a real impact in building a broader coalition. It's really easy to assume that because I'm speaking on behalf of Vote Mama Lobby, I'm only advocating for the moms and only advocating for solutions that help moms run for office. And while these solutions do help moms run for office, they in reality help all types of caregivers to be able to run for office. And that was a pretty natural shift for me to make because I'm not actually a mom. And so to be authentic to myself and tell my story within my advocacy work, I really tapped into my experience with caregiving, which was with elderly caregiving. I'm from Hawaii originally, and it's a big part of our culture and, our priorities and values, to take care of your kapuna, your elders. It's our kuleana, or our responsibility. And so I grew up in a household where our grandparents, did live with us. My mom did retire early to take care of my grandmother. And so that's the lived experience that I do bring into my advocacy work to talk about how this helps moms, dads, folks in the sandwich generation who are taking care of both young kids and elderly parents at the same time. And just by doing that, I was not only being more authentic to myself and, true to my values, but I was also bringing folks into the fold who didn't necessarily think that they were part of the movement. They weren't against the policies that I was advocating for in the beginning, but they just thought, I'm not a mom, that doesn't pertain to me, I'm not going to get involved. And as soon as I started including them into the success and, the vision of the policy, they were more willing, to advocate for it. They did now see that they had a stake in the game and were willing to go to bat for it. And I saw that with legislators as well as community organizations who now saw how these policies directly impacted a broader range of their constituencies and membership, and were willing to, show up at committee hearings in person and testify in support of these policies.
And can I just, go ahead.
Can I add one thing?
Yes.
I also think when you think about storytelling and coalitions, it's also thinking about storytelling our community stories, right? Our individual ones, but when we talk about the experiences that our community first of all, when you talk about Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, us coming together, all of the diversity that's included in that, just in Asian American, just in all of the different categories within our community, then bringing that all together, there's a coalition right there, right? And we see the commonalities amongst our community stories and histories, but then we also are able to, by telling our community stories, build those coalitions with other communities of color as well. And I think that has served our communal histories well. Those coalitions have been strong, and I think are still very strong.
Can I just add one thing to that? Is I second that. One thing, though, I also would not discount is the shared stories that exist among everyone, because what I always hesitate is to say that you're only ever trying to reach kind of those communities. You are leaders for everybody, right? In your community, in your district, in your state, wherever you are. So yes, absolutely, but I think that that's going to be so much of the power that you have, is to show people that your stories are universal, right? It's not just to one community or to one coalition. It resonates with everybody, and I think that's where, again, getting intentional about that.
Okay.
Can I just share from a legislative perspective, you know, in terms of your question, have you seen or witnessed stories change minds? I see that every day when we're in session and we're discussing legislation, particularly legislation that impacts the lives of community members directly. It's those powerful testimonies that the public brings and shares, and the way they connect what we're discussing as perhaps abstract policy to the impact that it's going to have on their individual lives. I have seen policymakers change their minds based on the testimony, the stories that the public is able to share. So that's where advocacy is so powerful in crafting policy as we go through state by state or even at the federal level.
Yes, thank you. That's a very interesting perspective. I have seen that myself as well. And so on a more practical level, Senator, what elements do you think make a story not just compelling but actionable?
I love this question because I am a former professor of literature, and so my entire professional experience was formerly based on analyzing stories, analyzing characters, analyzing the narrative voice and perspective. And I think as we get ready to share our own stories, it's really important to think about it in a conscious way, to think about it in a literary sense and develop that narrative in the most compelling form. And when you're thinking about what makes a narrative powerful, it really rests on essentially three items. You know, the classic elements of rhetoric, right? If you studied rhetoric, logos, pathos, and ethos. And so as the storyteller, we want to establish that credibility with our audience. We want to be believable. We want to make sure that the audience understands that what we are saying is true and honest and has that authenticity. And then secondly, we want to make sure we're drawing that emotional connection. And stories are universal. It doesn't, you know, they're not limited to cultures. They may be specific in certain ways, in nuances, but that universality of emotional response is always present. So using that emotional connection to make sure your audience understands how your story connects to them is so important. And crafting the story with yourself as a credible narrator is a critical step forward. And the actions can be subtle or they can be obvious. Clearly, when we tell our stories, we are doing it with a purpose. And what is that purpose? Whether it's to ask others to join us in advocacy, or it's asking us to actually take action, writing that letter to the elected official, or marching forward, joining a movement, running for office, we can craft that actionable item on the way in which we guide our own narratives. And so it's really important to be very conscious in the development of the story.
Yeah, no, I really like that. There is an art to story making, just like there's an art to public speaking, you know, and so that is, again, a wonderful perspective to keep in mind. So what role does data play in supporting narrative work in policy advocacy?
So I think I come at storytelling and advocacy separately from, I think about it as a former Hill staffer, as someone who would sit in an office and meet with folks, right, and hear their stories. And then that is, I think, the way I think about storytelling and advocacy, the perspective I'm bringing to this. But I think to answer your question, Pearl, I think we'll talk about why storytelling is so important in those spaces and why you've got to make sure the folks that we're electing know your stories and understand our perspectives. But data is also important, right? I think storytelling puts a face to an issue, something that you're going to go talk about, something that's of concern to you or of importance to you. And that really humanizes what you're going in to talk to someone about. That humanizes it for that legislative staffer or for whoever it is that you're trying to influence, right? This is no longer a stat on a piece of paper. This is the person in front of them telling them about their lived experience. But then to say it's not just me, right? Yes, I am telling you this is because it's important to me, but it's not just me. This is the scope of this issue, or this is the scope of the problem, or whatever the topic at hand is. That's where data comes in, right? It's look how much this affects me. Look at the effect that my storytelling, telling my story has on you, the person hearing it, and think about how many more people there are that can tell that same story, right? I think it puts in perspective the scope of issues, and that's exactly what you want legislators, for example, to hear, right? You want the decision makers to hear how widespread something is, or the impact of an issue or a problem, in order to get them to take action, whatever action that might be that you're advocating for. But that's why data is important. It can't all be stories. And also the data, when you think about data is like, it is stories, right? They're kind of the same. One is, in my head, a little bit more numbers. The other one is more sitting down and having a conversation, but they're kind of part and parcel of the broader advocacy package, I think. I don't think there's a way you escape either one.
And can I add to that? I would also say that the data helps draw the conclusion to the problem the story's trying to tell, right? So I always try to start a lot of my community-based conversations with the data, right? Moms are severely underrepresented at every level of office. We only have 7.9% of our state legislators in 2024 were moms with children under the age of 18. It's even lower at the congressional level. 6.8% of members of Congress in the 118th Congress were moms with children under the age of 18 at the time of serving in office. And we're missing a critical gap in representation at all levels of office throughout the country. And when you start with those statistics that show this isn't just one regional problem or one community problem, this is a problem throughout our entire country at every level. And then you bring in the stories to show this is why it's so hard for moms to run for office, and this is why it's so hard for moms to stay in office once elected. They're leaving because the system isn't sustainable. And moms who want to run for office aren't stepping up to run for office because the system doesn't work for them. And so we have to implement these structural changes and solutions to make it easier and to have representative government at all levels.
Yeah. It also makes people feel less alone. Like if you're just listening to one person even tell their story and you're like, oh, that person gets it, because I also have that, I've experienced that. But when you're like, right, but 69% of people in this country, ... or whatever the statistic may be, it just helps also people remember it. Because that's the other thing too that I think is the thread of everything we're talking about, is that the story is meant to provide that emotional connection so that people remember. They remember you, they remember your point, they remember the action, right? You remember stories sometimes even more than you remember the person telling it. So that's part of this like emotional piece of everything we talk about too.
And so how do you tailor stories for different audiences, say voters versus lawmakers versus even the media?
Yeah. You know what's fun? I'm with you. So I was a staffer. I worked on the Senate for 3 senators, 2 House members. I was also a multi-client lobbyist. Now I run, oh boy, fun times. And that was in 2017. We'll just leave that there. So for me, I think, to your point, you have to kind of bring in all of it. But the audience, you have to get really clear. The number of times that I either got lobbied or brought other people to help me lobby that were not clear in the audience, they had just like one message, they had one narrative, one talking point, and they would walk in and say like, oh, here's what it is. But if the person is not, that's not what resonates with them, that's not where their mind is, that's not how they're gonna make decisions, then you just wasted that opportunity, which is so unfortunate because we're not given that many opportunities to have the ability to change minds or to get in front of the people we need to. And I know many of you are the decision makers yourselves, but even still, getting into those spaces, it's tough. So I think knowing not just what the message needs to be and the story needs to be in the data and all the pieces that you're using for the talking points, but also what you're actually trying to get at. Because it could also be the action is not supported. It could be, please just don't go against it. Right? If you go to the media, like it's more like, hey, I just want you to make sure that you catch this one data point or this one piece of information that you can then take as like, I'm the leader and I am the authority on this particular issue, or I'm the author of this bill. I want to make sure that you connect those dots with me. So anytime you talk about this issue, you're coming to me for it. So there's different ways that you take the same story, the same data, the same everything, but just make sure that you are intentional about how you're putting it together and what you actually want as your goal from the audience. Because I think so many people think, oh, it's just the goal is to get support. That's not always the goal. And so you just need to kind of know what that is and what your expectations are, and it'll just make you so much more effective.
I would also just, I think on that note, add, when you're thinking about going to meet with a member or you're going to go meet with decision makers, right? When you think about tailoring that message, to me, it feels like, and I work on this with organizations that are doing like lobby days and things like that on the Hill, right? When you think about, okay, this is the member I need to go meet, this is the person I need to go talk to, why? Why is it important that you talk to them? And then use that as part of how you tailor a message, right? Because they belong to such and such committee, or because this is the role that they have, it's important they hear from me. Use that and think about how you tailor your message around the role that they have. They're the lead sponsor of a bill, or the lead sponsor of a bill against what you're doing, right? Like using all the why you think it's important to talk to someone to craft your story and craft your message to them as an audience using that.
Yeah. Just one quick follow-up to that. I know that I feel like there was a couple of workshops today that got at your personal style as well, right? Like how to authentically present yourself. And I think that's another piece to remember too, is to make sure that you know your audience and how they're expecting you. And I don't want to say this is terrible, but we're all women. We get judged all the time on what we wear, how we look, what's authentic, what isn't authentic. It is a challenge. But it matters to the audience you're trying to reach what you're wearing. Like, for example, if I were to wear this to a county fair and then I want someone to like take my bill on agriculture seriously, they're not going to. They're going to look at me, why are you wearing this outfit, right? Like you have to know where you are, what your audience is, what their intent, like again, what that goal is, and how you have to dress the part, you have to present the part. If you need allies with you, bring people with you. You need to know your talking points, your data, right? Like it all is together in a package. It sounds like a lot, but once you get your why down, once you get some of these facts and figures down, then it's just a matter of what do I wear today? And like, okay, who am I going to talk to again? Remind me, what's the point of this meeting? And I think that's yeah, it sounds really complicated, but you've seen people, I'm sure, come in that ask you to do things and you're like, you don't seem like a serious person.
Hopefully I'm not that judgmental.
No, I don't mean like that. I just mean sometimes they come in, if they don't have everything down, you're like, I don't
Right.
know though if this
they're
is,
not prepared,
this
yeah.
is professional.
But one thing, what you just said made me think, sometimes the expectations for each of us, and especially as women, are defined by other people. They're defined by a broader society, and a lot of times those definitions are put into place by men. How to look professional, how to behave in certain environments and spaces and so forth. And I think we are in a unique position sometimes to actually challenge those assumptions and to make sure that we have control over the stories that we are telling, how we're presenting them, and defy those traditional expectations, particularly those of us who are also bringing in multicultural perspectives. And it's not always the same. I know I have my personal difficulty sometimes is navigating across cultural expectations. So as a Muslim woman, sometimes when I am in spaces where the expectation is for gender segregation or that it is not fit for me as a woman to be addressing men in a public context, those are challenges that are unique, but I have to figure out how to do it. And I also have to challenge the structures of certain other cultures while I'm also navigating a culture in this context as well. So these are complicated decisions, but I think we empower ourselves when we actually take ownership and we craft our own path on how we're going to control our story, how we're going to present it.
Yeah, and I would say actually on my campaign, the one compromise I made with my parents was that my mom begged me not to talk about my sexual assault at the Korean fundraisers. So I said, deal. So every Korean American fundraiser I went to, I just talked about all the awards I got, the scholarship, and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't tell my why, so to speak, but I understood that obviously my parents, we all still live in that community. And so, again, like you said, kind of navigating the culture and just navigating my story. And so ultimately, that is what I decided to do. And in terms of media, I had kind of media training on the fly during the campaign. And what I found very interesting was, my press person kept trying to train me, like, you got to say it this way, you got to say it this way, you got to say it in like 10 seconds, And I was like, that sounds so unintelligent. No, right? And so I would go on radio, I would say and answer the question like I normally would, and then I heard it, and I sounded terrible, right? It truly, I sounded worse than if I had given like a 10-second clip. And I do think it's because obviously when things get edited and all that kind of stuff. And so they were basically telling me, I have to say the same thing over and over again, like 10 seconds, and not even answer their question, basically, which ultimately is sort of what I had to do, because then no matter what clip they gave, it was me saying the same thing, and it's exactly what I wanted the audience to hear. So that was very, I guess, fast learning curve for me as I was kind of talking to the media versus, on the campaign and so forth. Next question. So how can storytelling be more deeply integrated into advocacy training and organizational strategy?
So I think we talked a little bit about why, why storytelling is an important part of advocacy, right? Bringing that kind of individual, humanizing aspect to advocacy. And I think when you think about that from an organizational or an advocacy organization, for example, there's a lot of different ways to do that. I work with a lot of organizations, particularly in the broader AA and NHPI national space, on this, and it's something where we build it into their advocacy. When we talk about how are you going up to the Hill to talk about X, Y, and Z issue, supporting or opposing specific bills, whatever the case may be, whichever members you're meeting with or staff you're meeting with, it's kind of the crux of it is tell your story, right? And I think part of the way that organizations can do that, I guess is the question of how, is bring folks, the folks that you have in your networks across the country, bring them. The best way to get into a member's office is to be a constituent, right? You want a meeting with their office, you're a constituent, they're a lot more likely to take that meeting, right? And so whether it's, a bar association and the lawyers, or whether it's, some of the, in our communities, more, ethnic specific organizations that, or even some of the larger kind of pan AA and HPI organizations that are out there that do more of like the policy and advocacy work. You have chapters all across the country. Bring them to DC, have folks tell their stories, not just your policy managers and policy directors and communications directors that work here in DC or New York, or wherever your national office is, but all the folks that you as an organization represent across the country, bring them. Bring them into these offices, bring them to the folks that you're trying to influence so they can see not just the stats and you as the person who does this as your day job, but they can see the people that they represent who are here to talk about what's important to them. So I think thinking about that and thinking about the importance of, here in DC, sure, Capitol Hill is here and it's a great way to do lobby days and advocacy days and Hill days, but you can do this anywhere, right? I'm talking about it from this perch, but this is true of state houses, it's true of your local governments at every level. It's a way to make sure that the people who a lawmaker or who a decision maker represent hear directly from those who they represent, right? And so I think that is why it is important to build this into your organization's advocacy structures. It's important to build those, fly everyone out to DC once a year, or do it wherever your organizations are located, right? Do multiple. And I think to the point of storytelling as the crux of a meeting, for example, what I actually say when we talk about training for an advocacy day is that the goal of that meeting is not, especially for an organization or folks doing this in conjunction with an organization, but for yourselves too in your communities, is not a yes, I'll support this bill or no, I won't. It is building a relationship with that decision maker, with their staff, right? It's building these relationships so that they know where you stand. They understand where you're coming from. They know what your story is. And then you can keep building. You start with building it, and then you keep continuing to strengthen it, right? Don't just go meet with them, tell your story, and leave, and then they never hear from you again, right? You keep doing it. You follow up. They haven't done what you've asked them to do, you follow up again. And it's not in a mean way. That's your job as an advocate. It's their job to weigh the benefits, the costs, all of the things to what you're asking, and they might take time in doing that. But that's fine. You follow up, because that's your job as an advocate, to keep pushing for what it is that you're trying to see happen. So that is part of why advocacy is important, and storytelling in particular, I think, again, can only be done. It can be done by anyone, right? But I think being able to bring people from across the country, or bring people from all the folks that you all represent in your organizations to the table, and to talk about what's important to them and what's important to you and your organizations and communities is what is an easy way to weave this into your already existing advocacy plans.
Okay, and Senator, I'm going to leave the last question for you. How can stories be used to uplift historically marginalized and invisible communities?
Well, I think we've touched on quite a bit of this question already in terms of making our stories universal, making sure that we draw connections using very, very specific details, using data, being able to paint a picture for the audience that we're trying to speak to. But one thing I would like to just highlight in particular around stories for marginalized communities, or what we traditionally might call communities that have been made invisible by those who control storytelling, is a lot of times I see folks defaulting to stories of victimhood or oppression, and all of that is true. That's part of our experiences many times. But what I encourage folks to do is to also highlight the ways in which there is true power, there's true resilience, there is opportunity for showcasing the strengths, not just the vulnerabilities, but the strengths of these different communities. And that breaks the narrative, that breaks the stereotypes that often keep communities marginalized or made invisible. And so having control over that storytelling is in itself powering. And you know, the stories that get told are by those who actually have the ability, the power to make sure that their information is made public. And we, as many of us who are in marginalized communities, we're taking control, we're making it present, and that in itself is a step towards empowerment that's so critical.
Okay, thank you. And now I would love to open it up to the audience. Does anyone have any questions for our panelists?
Feels like end of day. You guys were real chatty earlier. I was here for lunch.
Well, I have a question, actually. Does anyone have any examples of when they felt a story backfired? And as they're thinking, you all can think of another question.
I mean, I think it's hard because I think you don't always know what the intention was. So like, for example, right now, there's so many times I see stories that are happening or people are telling something like in the national news narrative, and I'm like, that is horrible. But to their audience, it may be great, right? So like, I think it's a tough question because it depends on the intention. But I think the only time I ever see it backfire on the trail, like, is working with candidates that don't follow advice. When it comes to making sure that you are paying attention again to your audience. Like if you get up in front of a group that you shouldn't be talking about a certain story or bring up a certain experience and you sound tone deaf or you sound like you're not an ally or you're not someone who's like actually there are ways to do things even sensitively. And I think there's a lot of people that think they can just kind of bulldoze their way in without having some self-awareness. It takes a lot to have self-awareness, but I do think that's one of the benefits, no offense to the male allies in the room, but of women, is that we do tend to have a little bit more of that emotional connection kind of already within us to have with communities and with individuals. And so I think, again, just taking a beat. But yeah, I don't necessarily have, well, at least I don't have one that's like immediate, that was terrible. It's more when sometimes you're like, ooh, that's not the right, that was not the right talking point.
I've seen when jokes have backfired, so I always
yes.
caution people, if you're not funny or if you're not used to delivery of jokes, stay away from humor unless you really know your audience and really know what you're going to say. But you better land it.
Any questions? Oh, right there.
Hi, my name's Stephanie. I'm with the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. I guess my question regarding storytelling, you're trying to humanize this data, this issue that you really want to create a solution for, and oftentimes, you're telling the story to hopefully change legislation. How do you make sure that the people that are telling these stories, you don't make them feel like you're just using them? And then also, oftentimes, they're telling their experience, and it's too late. There's nothing you can do about it except this legislation coming out, which can't really impact them anymore. I guess, what have you done to just, I just don't want these folks to feel used, and, yeah. If you have any advice how to navigate those experiences.
I mean, I think this kind of goes back, in my mind, to your original question, Pearl, at the top about your comfort level with sharing, right, in a way that's comfortable and safe for you. Usually, even if we have a whole bunch of people in the room from all over the place and they're going to do all these different Hill meetings, and we talk about tell your story, oh, you have a personal connection to this, great, share it. If you want to, if you feel comfortable doing so, and if you don't, then don't share it, right? I mean, you can see that as a missed opportunity to make that connection, but at the same time, that's up to that individual, right? If they want to share or not. And I think your point earlier on, pick a different story or something like that is a great idea. Like, at the end of the day, our lives are not defined by one story, right? It might be what is most relevant for the issue you're talking about, but I think if someone's not comfortable or feels like they don't want to share, they don't have to. But I think then the data part helps then. That's why you have both, right? If you don't have that one gleaming, perfectly fitting into this narrative story, that's okay. There's others. If someone else is not in the meeting but has a story to share, that can still be shared, right? Of examples of the folks that you all work with, right, on specific issues. But I think it's also thinking about what parts of the story to share. Maybe you don't have to share it all, or if you feel some parts are a little too personal, no one's forcing that story share to happen, if that helps.
Yeah, and from an advocacy perspective or an organization perspective, I typically don't ask folks to come in and share their stories. I ask them to support the policy, or I ask them to voice their support, right? And then it really allows them to control how much they're going to share beyond saying, please vote yes on HB XXX, right? And even in testimonial templates that I'll provide, I do a lot of, uniform messaging with the stats, with the national landscape, and it's, an option if you want to share your story. And I would say, like, this is where you would put in your own personal narrative if you want to, and really leaving it up to the individual to decide how involved and how, public they want to be with their story. And then if it's an instance where we know we have a meeting coming up and we want to make sure that we're prepared with the story to match the data, I'll normally ask someone within our organization. Our founder and CEO did run for Congress back in 2018 as a mom with 2 young babies. And so I have her come share her story, right? Because she's very public about that story. She launched this organization. And then we're not having to put someone in an uncomfortable position with it.
Yeah. I also think there's ownership is a huge part of it, right? Like when you're building your team or you're engaging all the grassroots swell. One of the things that I tell a lot of groups is that you always have to focus on the 3 M's of political power. Anybody know the 3 M's? I'm sure one of them is obvious. Money, yeah, media and movers, right? So when you're looking at when you're talking to your team or to an individual or someone that you want to feel engaged, making them feel like they own part of what the overall strategy is, even for that moment. So even if something has passed, the moment has passed on one particular thing, if they feel bought into this overall strategy, that they're part of the movers piece, like that there's an element there that they are helping to move something forward, I think that ownership piece is super helpful, and it usually makes people feel again like they're participating and that they're not alone in the strategy. It's not like you're asking this person to share something super vulnerable and you're just gonna like throw them out there. There's a purpose to it, and it like helps you with your whole strategy.
Thanks so much for all of your insights. My name is Sylvia Cabas, formerly of the Peace Corps. At the Peace Corps and international development in general, many nonprofits, there is a methodology called ethical storytelling, which I encourage people to investigate, because many of the elements that the panelists have brought up correspond to that form of storytelling where you do not put the center of the story in jeopardy or reinforce cultural biases or other misinterpretations. So thank you for reinforcing that way of telling stories in a way that's responsible and still effective. Thank you.
Okay, and with that, some final thoughts. Louisa, why don't we start with you?
I'm so excited and thrilled to be in this room. Thank you so much for having me, and I hope everyone does run for office at some point, and encourage your other sisters to run for office as well. I think on the last panel they mentioned the 7 number statistic, right? Women need to be encouraged at least 7 times or asked 7 times before they run for office, and by being in this room, hopefully you heard it at least 7 times, and I'll be the 8th to tell you, please run for office.
Senator?
Well, I just want to thank everyone who's here, and want to encourage us all to keep thinking of the stories that shape us. A lot of times we suppress certain key moments in our own experiences because they may be too traumatic, they may be too personal, it may be hard. But what I've learned in 6 years now in my political work is that new stories, new experiences keep surfacing in my own consciousness, recollections not just from my own past, but the stories of others and the experiences that especially women in my life have helped to shape for me. I shared my grandmother's story, but it didn't hit me until just a few years ago how critical it was for her that her daughters have an opportunity that she did not have. And as I reflected back on that powerful way in which she made sure that education was central to everything she advocated for, what she fought for within her own family, then it became clear to me personally, this is my lineage. This is what I have inherited because I absorbed this message as a child. And so the more we experience our own communities and go through our lives, it's these kinds of stories that come to the surface, that resonate, and I would encourage everyone to just leave themselves open to those opportunities.
One thing I think is so easy in today's world is to put everyone in kind of boxes. And so I would just leave you all with that there's a lot more that is common among all of us than I think we even know, especially at a human level. So when you're never think that someone can't be an ally of yours or that they can't be moved by your story because you don't actually know what's in their background, you don't know necessarily what their story is, and that there's a lot that does resonate with people when you're telling it in an authentic way. And so I just say that it's great to make sure that you're resonating with the people that you need to in your community or your coalitions. But just remember that there's a broader world out there that benefits from hearing your stories that you may be able to bring along with you when you kind of keep an open mind of the humanity piece, the emotional piece of your story that is common among all of us.
I think I would close just on thinking about storytelling, not just as kind of this kind of larger amorphous concept in terms of advocacy, but thinking about how important your own life stories are to you, thinking about the fact that our community stories are our power, right? It is the way we are out there advocating for ourselves, for our friends and neighbors, and the kind of broader communities that we all are part of. And it's how we build bridges with other communities, finding those commonalities and universal experiences. And advocacy or not, those are the things that no one can take away from you, no one can take away from us as a community. And so as you kind of wrap up your day and think about this, don't feel intimidated by any of these pieces, whether that's thinking about your story out there on why you're running for office, or whether it's how do we get our community's issues more out there, so to speak, in the advocacy sense. But your stories are your power. So harness them and use them, and don't be afraid of them.
So I first got introduced with APAICS in the 2016 National Leadership Academy, and by 2018, I was running for US Congress. So my hope for all of you is that you learned a lot at your summit here. I hope that you all are inspired to run in the future or just get engaged in our political process, because it is so important. Please take advantage of the networks and the knowledge in this room, and thank you so much for attending, and thank you so much to the panelists for sharing your knowledge as well.
Thank you again to our panelists for that wonderful discussion. So this basically brings us to the end of our day today. I don't know about you, but I feel my heart is full. I feel energized. I feel in community. It's been a long day, but we heard from some amazing elected officials, community leaders, and it's just been really just amazing to hear all these stories. And thank you to every one of them for sharing their time, their wisdom. And of course, we'd like to thank our partners, Amazon, Coinbase, Transport Workers Union of America, and League of Women Voters for making today's possible with their generous support. A special thank you to the Amazon team, Kai, Brandon, Virginia, Julia, Noor, Nicholas, Sean, and their respective teams, as well as the catering team for making everything run so smoothly. We look forward to continuing the conversations and connecting with all of you this evening, which will continue on taking place in Amazon's Visitors Landing, which is downstairs on the first floor. So whether you're staying for the reception, heading home, or staying with us for the next 2 days at the APAICS National Leadership Academy, we hope that you feel seen, you feel supported, celebrated, and inspired to keep leading with purpose and possibility. The impact that we as women have in this space of public service doesn't end here. It's an ongoing journey that we carry on, and we take it back to each of our communities. It's so important for all of us to continue sowing all these new ideas, continuing to share and cultivate the future that we want to see in all of our communities. Please be sure to stay in touch with the Women's Collective and the broader APAICS network. And before we officially close our outer day today, I'd like to ask all of you to participate in an activity that will tie up our summit this year. Some of you may know that my heritage is Thai, and I'd just like to share this custom with you. In the past, Thai people used to organize a ceremony where they would tie string bracelets that have been blessed by Buddhist monks called Sai Sin, which basically translate to sacred or holy thread. and all of these would be shared with villagers. This practice originates from the Buddhist monks tying the saisin during community ceremonies. And while the community ceremonies themselves happen less frequently, the custom still occurs at various events, important events such as weddings, funerals, religious ceremonies, and blessings. So people tie these bracelets for one another as they pray and offer their blessings to the other person. And some of these blessings can be indicated by different colors of the string. Red is for love and protection, yellow for good fortune, green for health, and blue for wisdom. So in a way, we are also like a village. And as we continue to help each other grow individually as a community, work on the impactful work we do, build those relationships, this is all woven together. And if you haven't already, please be sure to take a bracelet. I believe they're being handed out, or they have already been handed out. Turn to the person to your right and offer to tie it on their wrist. And as you do so, and we invite you to share in conversation with your partner and ask them what area of growth they are seeking at this time. So as you tie the bracelet, please share words of blessings for them and encouragement for your partner. So as you've all shared your blessings, we want to thank you again for joining us today. Thank you so much, and have a really wonderful evening.